I walked into our corporate headquarters that Monday morning, expecting a friendly introduction to our new CEO. Instead, Nathan Sullivan cut me off before I could even extend my hand. He didn't look up from his paperwork as he spoke with cold authority. "You're terminated effective immediately. Security will walk you out." The words hung in the air like a slap. I smiled calmly, unclipped my employee badge, and placed it gently on his temporary desk. "Great, then you should probably start preparing for the board meeting in 1 hour." His head snapped up confusion, replacing his earlier confidence as I walked away. Nathan stared at my retreating figure, his mind racing with questions. Who was I to mention a board meeting so casually? He grabbed his phone and dialed HR immediately. "Janet, I need information on an employee I just terminated. Name's Kay. What's her position here?" He tapped his fingers impatiently on the desk. "Kay Morrison. Oh my, she's listed as Strategic Consultant Level 9 Access. Sir, are you sure you want to?" "Level 9? That's executive clearance. What department is she in?" "Copen." Janet's voice became uncertain. "Well, she doesn't report to any department specifically. Her file shows she has standing invitations to all board meetings and—" Nathan hung up abruptly. Something wasn't adding up. He pulled up the company directory on his laptop and searched for my name. The results made his stomach drop. My access permissions were extensive, covering every floor, every department, every secure area. I had clearances that even he, as the newly appointed CEO, didn't possess yet. He scrolled through my employee history. The records showed I'd been with TechFlow Dynamics for over 12 years. But my job descriptions were vague. Founder liaison, strategic oversight, executive consultant. None of it made sense for someone who should have been a regular employee. Nathan's hands shook slightly as he dialed board member Gregory Walsh's direct line. "Gregory, I need to ask you about someone. Kay Morrison. I just terminated her, but her access levels are—" "You did what, Gregory's voice pitched higher. "Nathan, please tell me you're joking." I'm serious. She walked in here like she owned the place, and I established my authority immediately. Isn't that what you hired me to do? Clean house and take control. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Nathan could hear Gregory breathing heavily. "Nathan, we need to talk. Meet me in conference room A in 20 minutes. And whatever you do, don't make any more personnel decisions until we speak." The line went dead. Nathan stared at his phone, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning fog. He pulled up the security system and backtracked through the morning's footage. There I was entering the building with my own key card, using the executive elevator, entering with a code that supposedly only he should have access to. He fast-forwarded through weeks of footage. I appeared regularly, always well-dressed, always walking with purpose. I attended meetings with department heads, reviewed financial reports, and sat in on strategic planning sessions. In every frame, employees treated me with clear respect and deference. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Sir, the board meeting has been moved up to 30 minutes from now. Emergency session called by majority shareholder." Majority shareholder. Nathan frantically searched through his orientation materials. All the paperwork he'd received focused on operational details reporting structures and company policies. Nobody had given him detailed information about ownership structure or major shareholders. He called his assistant directly. Lisa, who is the majority shareholder of TechFlow Dynamics. I believe that information would be in your executive briefing packet, sir. The one HR was supposed to give you on your first day. I never received an executive briefing packet. Send me everything you have on company ownership and board composition. Now. While waiting for the documents, Nathan grabbed his coffee and headed to conference room A. Gregory was already there, looking pale and nervous. The older man loosened his tie as Nathan entered. Sit down, Nathan. We have a problem. Clearly, start talking. Who is Kay Morrison? Gregory rubbed his forehead. This conversation should have happened before you started. The board assumed HR would brief you properly on all key stakeholders. Key stakeholders. She was wearing a regular employee badge. Kay has always preferred to maintain a low profile. She believes in leading by example rather than flashing titles around. Nathan's patience snapped. Leading what? Just tell me who she is. Gregory pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Kay Morrison is the founder and majority owner of TechFlow Dynamics. She built this company from nothing, starting in her garage 12 years ago. Nathan's world tilted. He opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were incorporation documents clearly showing Kay Morrison as the founding member and primary shareholder. Her ownership percentage made his stomach lurch 71%. 71%, he whispered. She owns 71% of this company. That's correct, which means she has controlling interest in all major decisions including hiring and firing the CEO. Nathan finished, his voice hollow. Gregory nodded grimly. Nathan, you just fired your own boss. The business cards scattered at the bottom of the folder caught Nathan's eye. Each one read Kay Morrison, founder and chief executive officer, TechFlow Dynamics. CEO. She was already the CEO. Nathan's head spun as the implications crashed over him. Every conversation he'd had with the board about taking charge and establishing leadership suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. They hadn't hired him to run the company. They'd hired him to replace someone who already owned it. How is this possible? Nathan demanded. How can you hire a new CEO when the current CEO owns the majority of the company? Gregory's face flushed red. That's a complicated situation that requires careful explanation. Uncomplicate it right now. Kay has been unavailable for the past 3 months due to a serious car accident. The board felt we needed interim leadership to maintain operational stability. Nathan stared at him. Interim leadership. Nobody told me this position was temporary. We were hoping to work out a more permanent arrangement that would benefit everyone involved. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. They hadn't hired Nathan to support Kay's leadership. They'd hired him to replace her entirely, banking on her absence, to consolidate power and force her out. Nathan's phone buzzed again. The emergency board meeting was starting in 10 minutes. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. In one morning, he'd gone from a confident new CEO to unwitting pawn in someone else's corporate coup. And the woman he'd just fired with such arrogance owned almost 3/4 of everything he'd thought he was in charge of. The conference room door opened, and I appeared calm as ever, carrying a leather portfolio. "Hello, Gregory," I said pleasantly, then turned to Nathan. "I believe you two have been having an interesting conversation." The emergency board meeting convened in the main conference room. Tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. I took my usual seat at the head of the table, while Nathan sat uncertainly halfway down, still processing the earthquake that had just shattered his understanding of reality. Board members filed in, looking uncomfortable. Sarah Martinez, our chief financial officer, avoided eye contact as she arranged her papers. Thomas Wright, representing our largest external investor, checked his phone obsessively. Patricia Collins from legal kept glancing nervously between Nathan and me. "Thank you all for attending on short notice." I began, my voice steady and professional. "I believe we have some important matters to discuss regarding recent unauthorized personnel decisions." Nathan found his voice, though it cracked slightly. "Before we begin, I need clarity on the ownership structure of this company. My orientation materials were apparently incomplete." Sarah Martinez reluctantly opened her briefcase and withdrew a bound document. "These are the current shareholder records filed with the Secretary of State last month." She slid the papers across the polished table to Nathan. Nathan scanned the numbers, his face growing paler with each line. "K. Morrison, 71%, he read aloud. TechFlow Employee Stock Plan, 12%. Brennan Investment Holdings, 8%. Harrington Capital Management, 6%. Miscellaneous Investors, 3%. "That's correct," I confirmed. "I founded TechFlow Dynamics 12 years ago with $5,000 in personal savings and a business plan I wrote at my kitchen table." I stood and walked to the whiteboard, picking up a marker to illustrate my point. "The company started in my garage in Austin, Texas. I built our first product prototype by hand, using components I ordered online and assembled myself. I spent 18-hour days coding, testing, and refining until we had something worth selling." Nathan listened mesmerized despite his growing panic as I outlined TechFlow's evolution. "Our first client was a small medical device company that needed custom software integration. I charged them $15,000 for 6 months of work. I lived on ramen noodles and determination." I drew a simple timeline on the board. Year 2, we moved to a rented office space. Year 3, I hired my first employee. Year 4, we landed our first major contract with a Fortune 500 company. Thomas Wright shifted uncomfortably. "Kay, while your company history is admirable, perhaps we should focus on current operational concerns." I turned to face him directly. "Current operational concerns like hiring a CEO without consulting the majority shareholder." Silence fell over the room. Patricia Collins cleared her throat. "Kay, the board felt that given your extended absence due to medical issues, interim leadership was necessary to maintain business continuity." "Interim leadership," I repeated slowly. "Mr. Sullivan, were you informed that your position was temporary?" Nathan shook his head. "I was told this was a permanent appointment with full executive authority." "Interesting." I returned to my seat and opened my portfolio. "Because according to our corporate bylaws, Any major personnel decision requires approval from shareholders representing at least 51% of voting shares. Sarah Martinez squirmed in her chair. The board interpreted your medical leave as temporary incapacitation, which grants us emergency authority under Section 12 of the Corporate Charter. I smiled coldly. Section 12 applies only when a shareholder is mentally incompetent or legally declared incapacitated. I was recovering from injuries sustained in a car accident, not suffering from cognitive impairment. I pulled out a medical report and placed it on the table. Dr. Amanda Foster, Chief of Neurology at Austin Presbyterian Hospital, confirms that I suffered no brain injury and retained full cognitive function throughout my recovery period. I was physically restricted but mentally sharp. Gregory Walsh finally spoke up, his voice defensive. Kay, we tried to contact you multiple times about the CEO position. You never responded to our calls or emails. That's because I was never sent any calls or emails about hiring a new CEO, I replied evenly. My medical team provided the board with my contact information and visiting hours. At no point did anyone attempt to reach me about this decision. I opened my laptop and projected my email inbox onto the conference room screen. Here are all communications from board members during my 3-month recovery period. 2 get well cards from Sarah, 1 fruit basket delivery notification from Thomas, and exactly 0 emails about corporate governance or executive hiring decisions. Nathan stared at the projection realization dawning. You had no idea they were hiring me. Correct. I learned about your appointment when I received an automated HR notification that my access privileges had been modified to report to a new CEO. I assumed it was a computer error until I saw you sitting in the lobby this morning. Thomas Wright leaned forward aggressively. Kay, regardless of the communication breakdown, the board acted in the company's best interests. We needed leadership during your absence. And how exactly did the board evaluate candidates for this position? What criteria were used? What was the selection process? The board members exchanged glances. Patricia Collins spoke carefully. The position was filled through an executive recruiting firm that specializes in technology sector leadership. Which recruiting firm? Brennan Executive Solutions. My blood ran cold. Brennan Executive Solutions. Victor Brennan's company. Victor Brennan, I said slowly. My former business partner who sold his shares 5 years ago. Sarah Martinez nodded reluctantly. Victor reached out to the board during your recovery period. He expressed concern about operational continuity and offered to help identify qualified candidates. Nathan's head snapped up. Victor Brennan personally recommended me for this position. He conducted my final interview himself. The pieces of a larger puzzle began falling into place in my mind. Victor hadn't just recommended Nathan, he'd orchestrated this entire situation. How much did the board pay Brennan Executive Solutions for this recruitment service? I asked. Gregory Walsh consulted his notes. $250,000 plus performance bonuses based on successful candidate placement. And who authorized this expenditure? Silence. Board votes require documentation. I continued. All expenditures over $100,000 require written authorization from the majority shareholder or a unanimous board vote. Show me the paperwork. Patricia Collins shifted nervously. The authorization was processed under Emergency Operational Authority. There is no such thing as Emergency Operational Authority in our corporate charter, I stated flatly. That's not a real legal concept. I stood up slowly, my anger finally beginning to surface. What you've described is corporate fraud. The board authorized a $250,000 payment to Victor Brennan's company, hired an executive without shareholder approval, and attempted to usurp majority shareholder control while I was recovering from injuries sustained in a car accident. Nathan suddenly understood the full scope of what he'd stumbled into. They used me, he whispered. Victor and the board used me to steal your company. That's a serious accusation, Thomas Wright protested. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Then you won't mind if I call our corporate attorney to join this meeting. I think David Chen would be very interested in reviewing the legal basis for all these recent decisions. Mercy. The board members' faces went pale. Gregory Walsh stammered, Kay, I think we may have acted hastily. Perhaps we can work out an arrangement that benefits everyone. An arrangement, I laughed bitterly. Gregory, you just admitted to committing securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The only arrangement I'm interested in is determining whether this was simple incompetence or deliberate criminal conspiracy. Nathan stood up abruptly. Kay, I need you to know that I had no knowledge of any of this. Victor told me you had agreed to step down voluntarily to pursue other interests. I studied his face carefully. His shock and confusion appeared genuine. Mr. Sullivan, you've been manipulated as much as anyone else in this room. The question now is whether you're willing to help me find out how deep this conspiracy goes. Sarah Martinez's voice was barely a whisper. Kay, what do you want from us? I closed my laptop and gathered my papers. I want the truth, all of it, and I want it before this board meeting ends. The weight of my words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Everyone present realized that their next words could determine whether they faced civil lawsuits, criminal charges, or both. Nathan looked directly at me. Whatever Victor told me was a lie. I want to help you get to the bottom of this. I nodded approvingly. At least one person in this room had chosen honesty. Now it was time to see who else would follow suit. The conference room fell silent as I pulled out a thick manila folder from my portfolio. I'd spent the past week gathering information, and what I'd discovered went far deeper than a simple hiring mistake. Since you've all expressed interest in the truth, I began spreading documents across the conference table. Let me show you exactly what's been happening while I was recovering. I placed a series of bank statements in front of the board. These are wire transfer records from Harrington Capital Management to various consulting companies over the past 6 months. Notice anything interesting about the timing? Sarah Martinez leaned forward, her face draining of color as she recognized the dates. These transfers all occurred during your medical leave. Correct. And notice the receiving companies. I highlighted several entries with my pen. Brennan Executive Solutions received $250,000 as we discussed, but Victor's company also received consulting fees totaling another $400,000 for strategic advisory services that apparently nobody can explain. Nathan studied the documents. What kind of strategic advisory services? That's an excellent question. I pulled out a second set of papers. According to these invoices, Victor was paid to facilitate operational transitions and coordinate leadership succession planning that apparently began 2 weeks after my accident. Thomas Wright's face flushed red. Kay, you're making serious accusations without context. Context, I laughed harshly. Thomas, you personally signed authorization for 3 of these payments. Here's your signature on a consulting agreement with Brennan Strategic Holdings, dated 6 weeks ago. I slid the document across to him. His signature was clearly visible at the bottom of a contract, authorizing monthly payments of $50,000 to Victor's newest shell company. I never signed that, Thomas protested, but his voice lacked conviction. DNA testing on the ink will determine whether that signature was forged or authentic, I replied calmly. Either way, you're facing serious legal consequences. Patricia Collins spoke up nervously. Kay, perhaps there's been some misunderstanding about the scope of these consulting arrangements. I turned to her with renewed focus. Patricia, as our board's legal counsel, you reviewed all these contracts before they were executed, correct? Well, not exactly reviewed, you're an attorney. These contracts represent nearly $1 million in unauthorized expenditures. Your professional license requires you to verify the legal basis for such agreements. I opened my laptop and projected another document onto the screen. This is an email from Victor Brennan to someone at Harrington Capital Management sent 3 weeks ago. It was accidentally copied to our company's general information account. The email appeared on the screen and Nathan read it aloud. Phase 2 proceeding as planned. Target unaware of ownership transfer preparations. Board cooperation confirmed. CEO placement successful. Recommend accelerating timeline before target returns to active status. The room went dead silent. Gregory Walsh stared at the projection in horror. Ownership transfer preparations, I repeated slowly. Victor wasn't just trying to replace me as CEO. He was planning to steal my shares entirely. I clicked to another document. This is a draft stock purchase agreement between Victor Brennan and Harrington Capital Management. They plan to buy my shares for 20 cents on the dollar. Claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my ownership responsibilities due to head trauma from the accident. Nathan's voice was barely a whisper. Head trauma, but your medical records clearly show you didn't suffer brain injury. Exactly, which means they planned to use falsified medical evidence to justify forced sale of my shares. I pulled out another folder. Dr. Marcus Webb, a neurologist with a history of questionable diagnoses for hire, was paid $15,000 to prepare an assessment declaring me cognitively impaired. I placed Dr. Webb's falsified report on the table. The document claimed I had suffered severe cognitive decline and was unable to make rational business decisions. Sarah Martinez read through the fake medical evaluation, her hands shaking. Kay, this is criminal fraud. If we had proceeded with this, you would have committed securities fraud, medical fraud, and possibly elder abuse, I finished. Victor's plan was elegant in its criminality. Fake medical evidence justifying forced sale of my shares to his partner at Harrington Capital, leaving me with a fraction of what I'd built. Thomas Wright stood up abruptly. I need to call my attorney. Sit down, Thomas. My voice carried absolute authority. You're going to listen to the rest of this before you make any decisions about legal representation. I clicked to another email chain. Victor's plan required cooperation from board members, which he secured through bribery and blackmail. The projected emails showed Victor offering Gregory Walsh a lucrative consulting position in exchange for supporting the CUEIO change. Another email promised Sarah Martinez an executive role at Harrington Capital if the acquisition proceeded smoothly. Thomas, I continued, Victor discovered your gambling debts at the Cherokee Casino and offered to pay them off in exchange for your cooperation. Yes, that must be my man. Thomas slumped back into his chair. How could you possibly know about that? Because Victor documented everything. He wanted insurance in case any of you developed a conscience. I displayed another set of documents. He kept detailed records of every payment, every favor, and every piece of leverage he held over each board member. Patricia Collins looked sick. He's been setting us up from the beginning. Correct. Victor needed scapegoats in case the plan failed. You were all being positioned to take criminal responsibility while he and Harrington Capital walked away with my company. Nathan had been studying the documents intensely. Kay, how did you get access to all these internal communications between Victor and Harrington? I smiled for the first time since the meeting began. That's where this story gets interesting, Mr. Sullivan. You see, I haven't been as passive during my recovery as everyone assumed. I closed my laptop and looked around the table. While you were all busy betraying me, I was building a case against Victor with federal investigators and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The blood drained from every face in the room. The FBI's Economic Crimes Unit has been monitoring Victor's activities for the past month. I continued. Every email, every wire transfer, every forged document has been captured and documented. Gregory Walsh's voice cracked. Federal investigators. Victor made one critical mistake in his planning. He assumed I was too trusting and naive to suspect my own board of directors. But I built this company from nothing, which means I learned to protect myself from people who would steal what I'd worked for. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Austin skyline. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will arrest Victor Brennan and execute search warrants on Harrington Capital Management's offices. Listen, the silence in the room was deafening. Nathan finally spoke up. Kay, what happens to us? To the board members who participated in this mosong. I turned back to face them. That depends entirely on your actions over the next 24 hours. The investigators are interested in securing cooperation from witnesses who can provide testimony about Victor's criminal conspiracy. Assigns. I sat back down and opened a final folder. I'm prepared to offer immunity agreements to board members who fully cooperate with the federal investigation and provide complete documentation of their interactions with Victor. And if we don't cooperate, Thomas Wright asked quietly, then you face federal conspiracy charges, securities fraud charges, and civil lawsuits that will bankrupt you and destroy your professional reputations. I answered matter-of-factly. I placed immunity agreement templates in front of each board member. You have 2 hours to decide whether you want to be witnesses or defendants in this case. Nathan looked at me with newfound respect. You've been planning this entire counterattack. Mr. Sullivan, I learned a long time ago that in business you're either predator or prey. Victor forgot that I didn't build this company by being anyone's victim. The board members stared at their immunity agreements, realizing their fates now hung in the balance of a decision between cooperation and catastrophe. The real battle was just beginning. The 2-hour deadline I'd given the board members passed in a flurry of panicked phone calls to attorneys and hushed conversations in the hallway. When we reconvened, 3 of the 4 board members had signed their immunity agreements. Only Thomas Wright remained defiant, claiming he'd done nothing wrong. Thomas, I said calmly, your refusal to cooperate is noted. Let me show everyone what the forensic accounting investigation uncovered while you were deciding whether to come clean. I connected my laptop to the projection system and displayed a comprehensive financial analysis. Our accounting firm Henderson and Associates completed a full audit of company finances going back 1 year. The results are disturbing. The first chart showed unauthorized salary payments. Nathan, you were hired at an annual salary of $450,000 plus bonuses and stock options. However, Victor arranged for your compensation to be processed as consulting fees, avoiding payroll taxes and employment law protections. Nathan studied the numbers. I was told this was a standard executive compensation structure. It's not standard, and it's not legal. By classifying you as an independent contractor while exercising control over your daily work activities, the company violated federal employment law. More importantly, Victor personally pocketed the employer portion of your payroll taxes. I clicked to the next screen. Victor has been collecting illegal consulting fees for the past 8 months, totaling $675,000. These payments were authorized using forged board resolutions and falsified meeting minutes. Sarah Martinez gasped as she saw her own forged signature on several documents. I never attended a board meeting authorizing those payments. Because those meetings never happened, I confirmed. Victor created fictional board meetings and forged your signatures to justify the expenditures. Mas usa as masventin. The analysis continued with more shocking revelations. Bank records show that Harrington Capital has been making under-the-table payments to board members through a network of shell companies. I displayed a complex money flow chart. Gregory Walsh received $80,000 through Apex Business Consulting, a company that exists only on paper. Sarah Martinez received $60,000 through Southwest Strategic Advisors, another fake company. Patricia Collins received $45,000 through Legal Research Associates. Usamuel. Patricia Collins stared at the screen in horror. I received those payments, but Victor told me they were legitimate consulting fees for market research. Anna sa min som, Market research that apparently consisted of voting to approve Victor's recommendations without question, I replied dryly. Gregory Walsh raised his hand shakily. Kay, I genuinely thought those consulting payments were legitimate additional compensation for board service. Gregory, our company bylaws clearly state that board members receive equity compensation, only no cash payments. You've served on this board for 4 years. You know the rules. I clicked to another screen showing Victor's most damaging activity. But the consulting fees and bribes pale in comparison to Victor's real crime industrial espionage and trade secret theft. The presentation revealed a systematic pattern of information theft. Victor has been selling our proprietary technology specifications to 3 different competitors over the past year. Nathan leaned forward, studying the evidence. How is that possible? Victor hasn't worked here for 5 years. Victor maintained unauthorized access to our computer systems through a backdoor he created in our security software before leaving the company. He's been downloading confidential files, client lists, and product development plans. I displayed email communications between Victor and executives at competing companies. Precision Tech Solutions paid Victor $100,000 for our latest manufacturing specifications. Digital Dynamics paid him $60,000 for our client contact database. Innovative Systems paid him $200,000 for our 5-year strategic development plan. Sarah Martinez looked physically ill. He's been selling our competitive advantages to our biggest rivals. Correct. And because our competitors had access to our internal strategies, they've been able to undercut our bids and steal our clients. I showed a chart of declining market share. Company revenues have dropped 12% over the past year, not due to market conditions, but because Victor was feeding our business intelligence directly to our competition. Thomas Wright finally found his voice. This is insane. Victor convinced us he was trying to help the company during Kay's absence. Victor convinced you of that because you were financially incentivized to believe him, I responded bluntly. Each of you received illegal payments in exchange for your cooperation. I displayed the most damaging evidence yet internal communications from Harrington Capital Management. But Victor's treachery goes even deeper. Harrington Capital has been deliberately destabilizing our company to drive down its value before attempting a hostile takeover. The emails revealed a coordinated campaign to damage TechFlow's reputation and financial position. Harrington had been spreading false rumors about the company's financial stability, encouraging clients to cancel contracts, and providing negative information to industry analysts. They planned to crash our stock price, force emergency liquidation of assets, and acquire the company for a fraction of its actual value, I explained. Victor was their inside man, providing intelligence and sabotaging operations from within. Nathan's face had gone pale. Kay, if this had succeeded, hundreds of employees would have lost their jobs. That was always part of the plan. Harrington specializes in asset stripping. They would have fired 70% of our workforce, sold off of our technology assets, and closed our Austin operations within 6 months. I turned to Thomas Wright. Tamir, you're still refusing to cooperate with the investigation. Are you prepared to go to federal prison to protect Victor Brennan and Harrington Capital? No, Sunson. Thomas stared at the financial evidence spread across the projection screen. The paper trail of crimes was overwhelming and undeniable. What kind of sentence would I face? He asked quietly. Securities fraud carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in federal prison and fines up to $5 million. Conspiracy charges could add another 10 years. Wire fraud for the illegal payments could add 5 more years per transaction. I let those numbers sink in before continuing. Or you can cooperate fully with federal investigators, testify truthfully about Victor's criminal scheme, and likely receive probation with community service. Thomas looked around the table at his fellow board members, all of whom had already signed immunity agreements. He was completely isolated. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice defeated. I placed a fresh immunity agreement in front of him. Complete honesty about your interactions with Victor, full access to your financial records, and testimony about the bribery and coercion he used to secure your cooperation. Nathaniel. Thomas signed the document with a trembling hand. Excellent, I said, collecting the signed agreement. Now that everyone is cooperating, let me explain what happens next. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will execute search warrants and arrest Victor Brennan and 3 executives from Harrington Capital. I closed my laptop and gathered my papers. The FBI will need detailed statements from each of you over the next week. I suggest you prepare yourselves for extensive questioning about your knowledge of and participation in this conspiracy. Nathan raised his hand. Kay, what's my status now? Am I still employed by the company? I looked at him thoughtfully. Mr. Sullivan, you were an unwitting victim of Victor's scheme. Your employment status depends on whether you're willing to help rebuild what was damaged and ensure this never happens again. Emerald. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Nathan said sincerely. Good, because rebuilding trust and restoring this company's integrity is going to require extraordinary effort from everyone involved. I stood up and headed toward the door, then turned back to face the board one final time. The next phase of this story begins tomorrow when Victor learns that his victims fought back. I should have anticipated that Victor wouldn't surrender quietly. The morning after our board meeting revelations, I arrived at the office to find chaos erupting on multiple fronts. My assistant, Jennifer Torres, intercepted me before I reached the elevator. Kay, we have serious problems. Legal documents were served this morning, and there's a crowd of reporters outside. I followed Jennifer to her desk where she'd organized the morning's crisis into neat piles. Show me the worst first. She handed me a legal injunction filed in Travis County District Court. As I read through Victor's counterattack, my blood pressure spiked. He was claiming that I was mentally unstable due to traumatic brain injury and posed a danger to the company and its employees. He's arguing that I'm cognitively impaired and should be removed from all leadership positions under Texas Business Code Section 15, I told Jennifer. He's requesting emergency guardianship and immediate transfer of my shares to a court-appointed conservator. Jennifer's eyes widened. Can he do that? Not if his evidence is fraudulent, which it is. I flipped through the attached medical documents. He's using Dr. Webb's falsified neurological assessment as the basis for his claim. My phone rang immediately. David Chen, our corporate attorney, sounded frantic. Kay, have you seen the injunction filing? Reading it now. How quickly can we respond? Oh, that's the problem. Victor filed for emergency relief, which means we have a hearing this afternoon at 2 o'clock. The judge has to rule on temporary guardianship before we can challenge the underlying evidence. I checked my watch. It was only 9:30 in the morning, but I already felt like I was fighting a three-front war. Jennifer handed me another folder. This arrived by messenger 20 minutes ago. Inside were photographs allegedly showing me in various states of confusion and disorientation during my recovery period. The pictures were clearly manipulated, but they looked convincing enough to fool a judge who didn't know better. Where did these come from? I asked. There's no return address, but the messenger said they were sent by a concerned employee who witnessed your erratic behavior during physical therapy sessions. I studied the photos more carefully. Someone had expertly doctored images of me during legitimate medical appointments to make it appear as though I was confused, agitated, or unresponsive. Victor's playing for keeps, I muttered. He knows the federal investigation is closing in, so he's trying to destroy my credibility before the arrests happen. My computer pinged with an urgent email from our head of security. The subject line read, "Confidential internal sabotage detected." I opened the message and felt my stomach drop. Someone had planted evidence in our financial systems, suggesting that I had been embezzling company funds through fake vendor payments. The fabricated evidence was sophisticated. False invoices showed payments to companies with names similar to legitimate vendors, but the bank account information led to offshore accounts, allegedly under my control. Jennifer printed out the bogus financial records. Kay, whoever did this has been planning for months. They've created a paper trail going back 8 months showing systematic theft of company resources. I called David Chen back immediately. David Victor has escalated beyond simple fraud. He's planted evidence suggesting I've been embezzling money. Can this affect the guardianship hearing? Absolutely. If the judge believes you've been stealing from your own company, it supports the argument that you're mentally unfit to manage your shares. Another crisis erupted when my phone started buzzing with text messages from employees. Victor's team had sent threatening letters to key personnel, claiming that anyone who supported my leadership would face immediate termination and potential criminal charges. I read one of the messages aloud to Jennifer. All employees are advised that Kay Morrison is under investigation for financial misconduct and mental incompetency. Any employee who provides assistance or information to Morrison faces termination and possible prosecution as an accessory to securities fraud. He's trying to isolate me, I realized. If employees are afraid to support me, I'll have no witnesses to testify about my actual mental state and business competency. Jennifer's computer chimed with breaking news alerts. Someone had leaked selective details of the federal investigation to financial news outlets, but the stories were spinning the narrative in Victor's favor. The headlines made me sick. TechFlow founder under FBI investigation for financial crimes. Austin Tech CEO faces mental competency challenge. Insider Trading Probe Rock's local software company. I grabbed Jennifer's mouse and clicked through the articles. Every story portrayed me as an unstable leader who had been stealing from her own company while federal investigators built a case against me. "This is character assassination," Jennifer said angrily. "It's strategic," I corrected. "Victor is poisoning the jury pool. If this goes to trial, potential jurors will have already formed negative opinions about my credibility." My phone rang again. Nathan Sullivan's name appeared on the screen. "Kay, I just got served with a subpoena to testify at your guardianship hearing this afternoon," Nathan said. "They want me to describe your behavior when I terminated you yesterday morning." "What are you going to say?" "The truth. That you were completely coherent professional and clearly in command of all your mental faculties." Nathan paused. "But Kay Victor's lawyers contacted me directly. They offered me a settlement agreement that would protect me from any legal consequences related to my hiring if I testify that you seemed confused and disoriented." My heart sank. Nathan was an honest man, but he was also facing potential criminal charges if the federal case expanded to include unwitting participants in Victor's conspiracy. "Nathan, I can't ask you to sacrifice your legal protection to help me. You need to do what's best for your family." "That's exactly why I'm going to testify truthfully," Nathan replied firmly. "My family deserves a father they can respect, not someone who lied under oath to save himself." Hasamas Nsikam. I felt a surge of gratitude and hope. At least one person was choosing integrity over self-preservation, but my relief was short-lived. Jennifer showed me another legal document that had just arrived, a motion to freeze all my personal and business assets pending the outcome of the guardianship hearing. "Victor is trying to bankrupt me before I can fight back," I explained to Jennifer. "If my assets are frozen, I can't pay legal fees or continue operating the business." The morning's attacks were coordinated and devastating. Victor wasn't just trying to steal my company. He was trying to destroy my life entirely. I sat down at Jennifer's desk and took a deep breath. The counterattack was fierce, but I hadn't survived 12 years as an entrepreneur by backing down from bullies. "Jennifer, call David Chen and tell him we need an emergency strategy meeting in 1 hour. Then contact Dr. Foster at Austin Presbyterian and ask her to prepare for immediate testimony about my cognitive status." "What are you planning?" Jennifer asked. I smiled grimly. "Victor wants to play hardball. He's about to learn that he picked the wrong woman to destroy." The real fight was about to begin. The emergency strategy meeting in David Chen's law office felt like a war council preparing for the battle of our lives. David had assembled a team of specialists, a forensic accountant, a digital security expert, and a private investigator who'd been quietly gathering intelligence on Victor's activities. "The guardianship hearing is in 4 hours," David began. "Victor's legal team is confident they can convince Judge Martinez that Kay poses a danger to herself and the company. We need to destroy their case before they present it." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a recording device. "Then it's time to reveal what I've really been doing during my recovery." David stared at the device. "Kay, please tell me you didn't do anything illegal." I smiled and pressed play. Victor's voice filled the conference room crystal clear through professional-grade recording equipment. "The key is timing," Victor was saying to someone on the phone. "We need to move fast while she's still weak from the accident. Once she's back at full strength, she'll be much harder to manipulate." Umi is sitting. The forensic accountant Maria Santos leaned forward. "When was this recorded?" 6 weeks ago, I replied. "I've been documenting every conversation, every meeting, and every illegal transaction since I learned about the conspiracy." The recording continued with Victor discussing his plan to bribe board members, forge medical evidence, and steal company assets. His voice was calm and calculated as he described destroying the business I'd built from nothing. "How did you get access to these conversations?" David asked. "Remember that car accident everyone keeps mentioning?" It wasn't an accident. The room fell silent. Jennifer Torres, who had joined us for the strategy session, gasped audibly. "Victor arranged for my car to be sabotaged," I continued. "He needed me out of the picture while he executed his takeover plan, so he hired someone to tamper with my brakes. The accident was supposed to be fatal." I pulled out another folder containing police reports and mechanical analysis. The Austin Police Department's accident reconstruction team found evidence of brake line tampering, but they couldn't identify the perpetrator at the time. Maria Santos studied the police documents. "Kay, this is attempted murder." "Correct, which is why the federal investigation expanded beyond securities fraud to include attempted murder and racketeering charges." I played another recording where Victor discussed the sabotage with his accomplice. "She's tougher than I expected," Victor's voice admitted. "The accident should have killed her, but she's recovering faster than anticipated. We need to accelerate the timeline." David Chen was taking notes frantically. "Kay, how long have federal investigators been involved?" "Since the day after my accident, when I realized the brake failure wasn't mechanical." I pulled out my phone and showed them my contact list. Special Agent Linda Murphy from the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit has been my primary contact throughout this investigation. Jennifer looked confused. "But if you've been working with the FBI, why didn't you stop Victor's plan earlier?" "Because we needed him to commit the crimes before we could arrest him. Attempted murder charges require extensive evidence, and securities fraud cases need documented financial transactions. We had to let Victor think he was succeeding while we gathered proof." I opened my laptop and showed them the real scope of the federal operation. Operation Clean House has been monitoring 12 different individuals and 3 companies connected to Victor's criminal network. The screen displayed a complex organizational chart showing connections between Victor Harrington Capital, corrupted board members, and even some of our competitors who had been buying stolen information. "Harrington Capital isn't just a private equity firm," I explained. "They're a criminal organization specializing in corporate espionage and hostile takeovers through illegal means. Victor was their inside man for targeting mid-sized technology companies." Maria Santos studied the FBI organizational chart. "How many other companies have they stolen?" 14 in the past 5 years, with total losses exceeding $200 million. I clicked through case files showing similar schemes in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Phoenix. "TechFlow was supposed to be their biggest score," I continued. A profitable company with valuable intellectual property and a majority owner who could be eliminated through accident. David Chen shook his head in amazement. Kay, you've been running a counterintelligence operation while recovering from attempted murder. Listen, I built this company by being smarter and more determined than people who tried to destroy me, I replied. Victor forgot that I didn't get where I am by being anyone's victim. I played one final recording that would demolish Victor's legal strategy completely. In this conversation, Victor explicitly discussed falsifying medical evidence and bribing Dr. Webb to provide fraudulent neurological assessments. The best part is that she'll never see it coming. Victor laughed on the recording. By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll own her shares, and she'll be locked up in a mental health facility. Jennifer Torres looked sick. He was planning to have you institutionalized. That was always the end game. Steal my company, steal my freedom, and leave me with nothing. I closed the laptop and looked around the room. But Victor made one critical mistake. What's that? David asked. He assumed I was weak enough to be a victim. I stood up and gathered my materials. Special Agent Murphy is executing arrest warrants as we speak. Victor and his co-conspirators are being taken into custody right now. As if on cue, my phone rang. Agent Murphy's name appeared on the screen. Kay, we've got them all. Victor Brennan, 3 executives from Harrington Capital, and the mechanic who sabotaged your car. We also executed search warrants on Harrington's offices and recovered computer servers containing evidence of the entire criminal enterprise. I put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. What about the guardianship hearing? It's been canceled. Victor can't pursue legal action from federal custody, and Dr. Webb is cooperating with our investigation in exchange for reduced charges. David Chen smiled for the first time all day. What happens next? Agent Murphy's voice carried satisfaction. Victor Brennan is facing federal charges, including attempted murder, securities, fraud conspiracy, racketeering, and cybercrime. He's looking at life in prison without possibility of parole. I felt 12 years of stress and anger finally beginning to lift from my shoulders. Thank you, Agent Murphy. When do you need me for testimony? We'll need detailed statements over the next week, but the case is solid. Victor documented his own crimes so thoroughly that his conviction is virtually guaranteed. After hanging up, I turned to address my legal team. Now comes the hard part, rebuilding trust and restoring integrity to TechFlow Dynamics. Jennifer Torres raised her hand. Kay, what about Nathan Sullivan? He was manipulated just like the board members. Nathan chose honesty over self-preservation when it mattered most, I replied. That's exactly the kind of character we need in leadership positions. Mode system. David Chen was already planning our next steps. Kay, you'll need to address the company about what happened, reassure employees about job security, and implement new governance structures to prevent future corruption. And I'll need to decide whether to keep TechFlow private or consider strategic partnerships that align with our values, I added. This experience taught me the importance of having strong allies who share our commitment to ethical business practices. Maria Santos looked up from her notes. Kay, you've been incredibly strategic throughout this entire ordeal. How did you know you could trust the federal investigators? Listen, I didn't trust anyone completely, I admitted. But I verified everything independently and documented all my own evidence as backup insurance. When you're fighting for your life and your life's work, paranoia becomes a survival skill. I packed up my materials and prepared to return to TechFlow headquarters. The company Victor tried to steal is going to emerge stronger, more ethical, and more successful than ever. Because you fought back, Jennifer observed. Because I refused to be anyone's victim, I corrected. Victor learned too late that destroying someone requires them to surrender first. The war was over. Now it was time to win the peace. 6 months later, I stood before a packed auditorium at TechFlow Dynamics' new headquarters, addressing our expanded team of employees for our quarterly company meeting. The company had not only survived Victor's criminal conspiracy, but had emerged stronger and more successful than ever. When someone tries to steal your life's work, I began looking out at the faces of 200 dedicated employees. You have two choices: surrender to fear or fight back with everything you have. Today, I want to share with you how choosing to fight transformed our company and our future. The federal trial had concluded the previous month, with Victor Brennan receiving a sentence of 35 years in federal prison for attempted murder, securities, fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. Harrington Capital's criminal enterprise had been dismantled, with executives facing similar sentences, and the company forced to pay $150 million in restitution to their victims. Dr. Webb, the neurologist who falsified medical evidence, lost his medical license and received 5 years probation for fraud. The board members who cooperated with the investigation received community service and were permanently banned from serving on corporate boards, but avoided prison time. The most important lesson from this experience, I continued, is that integrity isn't just a nice idea to put on office posters. Integrity is what protects everything we build together. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, showing TechFlow's financial performance since the criminal conspiracy was exposed. When clients learned that we'd eliminated corruption and implemented transparent governance, our revenue increased 43%. Companies want to work with businesses they can trust. Nathan Sullivan, now officially serving as Chief Operating Officer, had proven himself to be exactly the kind of leader we needed. His decision to testify truthfully during the federal investigation, despite personal legal risk, demonstrated the character that made him invaluable to our future success. We've implemented new safeguards that make it impossible for any individual to compromise company operations, Nathan explained from the podium. Every financial transaction over $10,000 requires dual approval. Every board decision must be documented and distributed to all shareholders within 48 hours. Every employee has access to anonymous reporting systems for potential ethics violations. The new governance structure included an independent audit committee, external oversight of all major contracts, and quarterly reviews by a corporate ethics firm. We'd also established an employee stock ownership plan that gave every team member a direct financial stake in the company's success. But the most significant change, I continued, is our commitment to transparency and shared prosperity. Every employee now owns equity in TechFlow, which means everyone benefits when we succeed, and everyone has a voice in how we operate. The employee stock ownership plan had been overwhelmingly popular. Workers who previously felt like disposable resources now understood they were genuine partners in building something meaningful and lasting. Sarah Martinez, who had cooperated fully with the federal investigation and expressed genuine remorse for her participation in the conspiracy, had been allowed to remain as Chief Financial Officer under strict oversight. Her expertise was valuable, and her experience with the consequences of corporate corruption made her a powerful advocate for ethical practices. I want to personally apologize to every person in this room, Sarah said when I invited her to address the company. My decisions nearly destroyed what all of you had worked so hard to build. But Kay's willingness to offer redemption instead of revenge taught me what real leadership looks like. The new TechFlow had attracted attention from major technology companies interested in partnerships and acquisition discussions. But unlike Victor's criminal scheme to steal the company, these were legitimate offers from organizations that valued our culture and wanted to preserve what made us unique. We've received acquisition offers totaling over $400 million, I announced to surprised gasps from the audience. But we've decided to remain independent and continue growing as an employee-owned company where everyone shares in our success. The decision to reject acquisition offers had been unanimous among employees when we held a company-wide vote. TechFlow's team understood that maintaining our independence meant preserving the values that made our workplace special. Jennifer Torres, now serving as Vice President of Operations, had been instrumental in rebuilding trust with clients and partners. The most rewarding part of this experience has been watching our team come together to prove that ethical businesses don't just survive, they thrive. As I prepared to conclude the presentation, I reflected on the deeper lessons learned through surviving Victor's betrayal and attempted murder. Building something meaningful always attracts people who want to steal what you've created rather than build something themselves, I told the assembled team. But when you surround yourself with people of character and create systems that reward integrity, theft becomes impossible. The applause was warm and sustained, but more importantly, I could see renewed pride and commitment in the faces looking back at me. After the formal presentation, I gathered with our leadership team to review strategic plans for the coming year. TechFlow's reputation for ethical business practices had become a competitive advantage that attracted the best clients and the most talented employees. Nathan pulled me aside for a private conversation. Kay, I've been thinking about what happened and how it changed my perspective on leadership. How so? When I first arrived here, I thought leadership meant having power over people. But watching you fight for this company taught me that real leadership means having responsibility to people. I smiled, remembering my own journey from idealistic entrepreneur to seasoned business leader who had learned to protect what mattered most. Nathan, you chose integrity when it would have been easier to choose self-preservation. That decision revealed your true character and made you exactly the kind of leader this company needs. Usmaston. As we wrapped up the evening's meetings, I walked through our expanded facilities, observing employees who worked with purpose and pride. The company Victor tried to steal had become stronger because we'd learned to value character over profit and long-term trust over short-term gain. The final piece of justice had come when the FBI recovered all the money Victor had stolen and paid substantial financial compensation to TechFlow for damages. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was proving that good people who stand together can defeat any conspiracy built on greed and betrayal. Standing in my office, looking out at the Austin skyline I'd grown to love, I felt deep satisfaction knowing that TechFlow would continue growing and thriving long after I eventually stepped back from daily operations. The company would survive and prosper because we'd built something authentic and valuable, protected by people who understood the difference between stealing what others create and building what the world needs. As I turned off the lights and headed home, I realized the most important truth of all. When you refuse to be anyone's victim, you become capable of creating victories that last. What challenges have you faced in your workplace or business where someone tried to undermine what you'd worked for? How did you choose to respond when faced with betrayal from people you trusted? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story inspired you to think differently about standing up for what's right, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to surrender to those who tried to destroy them. Share this with anyone who needs to remember that integrity and determination can overcome any conspiracy built on lies and greed. Thank you for joining me in this journey, and remember, when you build something with honor, no one can ever truly take it away from you.